Hello, in this video I'm gonna add the option to replace the buildings that already has been placed on the grid. So before we continue, let's fix a few little problems. First I'm gonna go to my server project, and here in the database let's scroll down, and here in the place building, when I check to see if the building is outside the limits that has been defined for it, here instead of saying greater than columns, I'm gonna say greater or equal. The same thing here, greater or equal than 45. That's one problem down. And here detection of the building overlapping is actually working just fine. In the previous video I had a problem, and the problem was causing because let's go to the database. Here in the server buildings, the size of our prefab on the grid should be 3 for the columns and 3 for the rows, and that is going to fix the problem. Now I'm gonna go to the building and I'm just gonna select them all and delete them. So that's it. Let's go to our Unity editor. By the way, it's better to use mobile shader for your game. For example, let me select the grid ground, and as you can see the shader is on standard, which I'm gonna change to mobile, and let's say unlit supports light map or whatever. Shaders have great impact on performance, so I recommend whatever assets you use in your scene, definitely use mobile shaders for these trees, ground, anything, buildings you place. There are packages that contains shaders for mobile games. You can also write your own shaders if you can. I just wanted to let you know you can do that. Now when we placed a building on the grid, we need to be able to select that. So to select a building, we need to detect if we clicked on that building or not. So we need to create an input for it. So let's go to the script folder, and in the input I'm gonna create another control, and I'm gonna name it pointer click. So this pointer click is going to be a button, and we're gonna say tap, and here in the bindings the first parameter is going to be the mouse left click button, and I'm also going to add another binding, let's say touch screen, and it's gonna be primary touch tap. So let's save this. Now I'm going to go to my camera controller, and let's add the listener for our tap button. Here I'm just gonna say private void screen clicked, and here I'm just gonna copy one of these events and paste it here, and instead of touch zoom I'm gonna say pointer clicked, and instead of cancelled I'm gonna say performed. So let me copy that and paste it here on disable. We need to remove that listener, and we also need to rename this to screen clicked, the same thing here. So whenever player taps the screen, this function is going to be called, but we also need to make sure whenever the player clicks on the screen, if the position of that click is on one of these UI elements, we don't want to do anything. Only when that position is somewhere that has not been covered by the UI. So we can create a function to check that. Let's go back to the script and create a function for it. So I'm gonna name it is screen point over UI. So to go further, we need to add a namespace saying using Unity Engine event systems. So let's go back to the function and create an pointer event data, and let's name it data equals to new, and we're gonna pass the event system dot current. We also need to pass that screen position, which is a vector2 dot position, and here we say data dot position equals to the position of the screen that we just passed, and we need to create a list of results. It's gonna be raycast result, and we're gonna say event system dot current event system dot raycast all, and we're gonna pass that data which is our pointer event data, and we also pass the results list that we've created, and we simply return if the results dot count greater than 0. It means that there is a UI element under our click position. Otherwise it returns false, which means there is nothing under our click. So we need to check that. We're gonna say if is a screen over UI, and we need to pass a position, of course. So to do that, we can simply say input dot main dot pointer position, and we're gonna read the value, which is a vector2. But let's save that position in the vector2 because we're gonna be using that. So let's say position, and I'm just gonna cut this, paste it here, and pass the position here. Now let's go to the building. Here in the building we created an instance. I'm just gonna rename this to build instance. And I'm going to apply the changes. So this is going to change the name of all the references in the project. In the entire scripts just got renamed to build instance. I'm going to rename this as well to build instance. And I'm going to apply the changes. Of course, I can use a single variable for my instances, but it's better to keep them separated, so it would reduce the amount of mistake that we could make, and also it's less complicated. So let me paste it, and this is going to be selected instance. So here in this building, I'm going to create two more functions. One of them is going to be selected and the other one is going to be deselected. And here in the camera controller, I'm gonna loop through all the buildings on my grid. Our grid was in the UI main.instance.grid buildings and count. If you remember, here in the move started of our camera controller, we created a function to check if our position is on the certain area of the plane. So let me just use this. Actually, I'm just gonna copy it and let's paste it here. Just gonna remove this content. It says UI main instance grid is world position is on plane. So first we need to convert this position to world position. Another thing that we are doing right here, so let me copy that as well. I'm gonna bring it up here. I'm gonna paste it before the for loop, and let's name it vector3. I'm gonna name it plane position, and it's going to pass this position, and here I'm gonna pass the plane position. And instead of building dot build instance, I'm gonna use UI main instance grid buildings I. So let me copy that and paste it instead of this and add an I to it. So let me copy that and paste it for the other parameters. So this checks to see if we clicked on this building. If we did, we're gonna break from this for loop. But before we do that, we're gonna say UI grid buildings I dot selected. So let's go to this selected function in the building. First of all, we're gonna check to see if selected instance is null or not. If it's not null, then we're gonna check to see if the selected instance equals to this, which means we just clicked on the building that has already been selected. So we're gonna do nothing. We could just say return. Otherwise, we're gonna say selected building dot deselect. So we're gonna deselect that one, and here we can do the rest of the stuff we need to do. I'm going to create a UI for it. Let's go to the UI and create a new script. I'm gonna name it building options, and let's open this up. I'm gonna copy the instance from another script. Let's say copy it from UI shop and paste it here. And up here I'm gonna say using unityengine.ui. So we don't need a close button now. And this is going to be UI building options, the same thing here. And let's go and create this UI. I'm just gonna duplicate this shop and say options. I'm gonna remove this script and attach that one. Let me expand this. That is going to be my elements. I'm gonna remove this background image and this button close, and here this buildings list. Let me go to the 2D view. I want to bring it down here, something like that. Let's say 0.03 and 0.15. Put these values to 0. Maybe 15 is too little, make it 17. Or maybe 18. Okay, this is good enough. This is going to be buttons. And let me expand this content, and here it is. Let's say button info. All of the buildings have info. So for now, I'm just gonna create one info button. Let me remove that. And here in the content, I'm gonna anchor them to middle center. And of course, we don't need the scroll rect, so I'm just gonna remove that. And I also don't need this whole hierarchy, so I'm just gonna move the content under this elements. And let's copy the values of our buttons and paste it here. And also remove these buttons and rename this one to buttons. So that's it. That is our info button. Let me reduce the width to 200. And let's also readjust the text. And let's just say info. Let me just disable that. And let's go to the script. Here in the UI building, whenever we deselect something, we're gonna say UI.buildingOption.instance. We also need to create a method to enable and disable it. Let's just use one of these ones. Set status. Building options. I'm just gonna paste it here. So here in the building, we're gonna say set the status to false on the select. And of course, in the select function, we're gonna enable it, set it to true. Now let's go back to the camera controller. The first thing, we check to see if that position that got clicked has been over a UI element or not. If it is over a UI element, we're gonna say else. We check to see if a building has an instance of selected. So let's say building dot selected instance is not equals to null. Then we're just gonna deselect that building. And here I'm gonna create a boolean called found, and it is going to be false. So here I'm gonna set the found to true, and here I'm gonna check to see if the found is true or false. If it is false, then we're gonna do the same thing we did here. We're gonna check to see if the selected building has an instance, and if it does, deselect it. And now let's double check everything. Okay, this is a little problem here. This should be false. Okay, that's gonna take care of that. And let's do one more little thing. Let's go to the building here in the set base color. We can also add an option to say if our coordinates is not available, then we're gonna say UI build dot instance dot confirm button dot interactable. Well, actually we do not have a reference to the button, so let's go and get a reference to it. Let's go up here, and here I'm just gonna create a public button, and I'm gonna name it click confirm button. Let's say null, and I'm gonna hide it in the inspector because I don't want it to be assigned from the inspector. And here in the awake function, I'm gonna say click confirm button equals to button confirm game object dot get component button, something we have right there. I'm just gonna copy and paste it. So we're gonna get the button component from our button confirm rect transform. So now we have a reference to that. Let's go back to the building, and instead of button confirm saying click button confirm dot interactable equals to true, and let's just set it to false here. False. And let's go back to the server and play the server. And in the client, I'm gonna play the game. Okay, I'm gonna go to the shop and place a gold mine, let's say here. I want to click this building and the info panel pops up, and when we click somewhere else, this should get disabled, but the reason it's not getting disabled, let's go and see why. There's no problem here. Let's go to the building, and it's because we are not assigning the selected instance when we get selected. So we're gonna say selected instance equals to this. And let's save that and play the client one more time. Now I select this, I click somewhere else, it gets deselected. Now let's go to the shop, place another gold mine. As you can see, this button gets deactivated when it's red, and it gets activated again. So let's place this here. So when I click a building, this info panel pops up, and depending on the type of the building, we also need to add more buttons like collect button, terrain button, and stuff like that. So let's go back to the client, and here in the deselected, we need to make sure to set the selected instance to null. Let's also create a couple of integers up here. And it's gonna be original X and original Y. Let's assign these values whenever the building gets selected. We're gonna say original X equals to current X, and original y equals to current y. And here when it gets deselected, we need to check to see if our original x is not equals to current x, or our original y is not equals to current y. In this case, we know that the building has been moved around. In this case, we need to check to see if UI main.instance.grid, so we're gonna say can place building, so the building is going to be this, and the positions are going to be current x and current y. And we also add an else statement. If it can be placed on that location, then we're gonna send a request to the server and also check with the server, and if it confirms it, then we're gonna place the building on that location. Otherwise, we're gonna snap back the building to its original position. To do that, we have a function here, place on the grid. So let's handle that first. We're gonna say place on the grid, and we're gonna pass original x and original y. And we're also going to disable the base area. And we're gonna handle that part later. But now we need to handle the movement of the building. So here in the camera controller, let's go to the move started. As you can see, we have a boolean that indicates if we are placing a building on the grid. This is for build only. We need to create another one for replace building. So let's go up here, and I'm just gonna copy that and let's paste it here. Instead of building, I'm gonna say replacing. And this is going to be is replacing building. So let's go back to the move started. Right here, we're gonna create an if statement, and we're gonna say if we are not replacing right now, and our building dot selected instance is not equals to null, then we need to do some stuff. We're gonna do exactly the steps we did here. So let me copy all of these values, and we need to create variables like this. Let's go up here. There are two variables. I'm just gonna copy them, paste them here under our replacing. So here it is going to be replace, and this is going to be replacing building. So let's go back. This is going to be replace base position equals to that, and this is going to be replace base position. And of course, instead of build instance, we need to use selected instance for these values. And the last one, selected instance. And this is going to be replacing building. This one also need another condition, and it's going to be and replacing building equals to false. And of course, we don't have to check that like this. And here I'm gonna say if we are not replacing, then replacing equals to true. And now let's go to the update function. As you can see, there is an option for building. Let me copy that. We're gonna create another one for replacing. And the contents are going to be exactly like that, but we need to make sure to set these values to false whenever we cancel building. So let's go to the building, and here whenever the building gets deselected, not only we set the instance to null, we also say camera controller dot instance is replacing building equals to false. Of course, it would have been better if we put these functions inside the building class. We might do that later, but leave it like that for now. And of course, here instead of build instance, we need to say selected instance. Let's also check out the update. Here instead of build instance, we're gonna say selected instance. Now let's also check out the move cancelled. And here I'm gonna set the replacing to false. And also we've created a new vector 3 for our base replace position. Let's go to the update, and here we need to use replace base position. Now let's go to the client and see what's happening. So we have two buildings. Let me select one of them. I can move it around, and let's move it outside of the grid. Deselect it, it's gonna snap back. Okay, let me select it one more time. It's outside of my grid, so whenever I click somewhere else, it gets deselected and it snaps back. Now let me select it again and move it here. This is inside the grid, which is an available place to be placed. So whenever I click this, nothing happens. It's because here in the building, this scenario happens. So we need to handle that later. But after all, everything works just fine. So yeah, let's go to the server. I'm gonna stop the server. And here, instead of place building, let's create another function called replace building. So I'm gonna copy both functions. One of them is place building and the other one is place building async. Let me just copy both and paste them here and collapse this and this. So this is going to be replace building, and the other one is going to be replace building async. So let's go here. So I don't pass device anymore. So this is going to be building database ID. So we're just gonna say database ID, and this is the X and Y coordinates that we want to replace the building to it. So let's create a packet to give a response, and we're gonna get the player data, and here we're gonna get the building of the player. We already have a function for it. So let's say data.building equals to get building async, not the server building, and we're just gonna pass the building database ID. Also, we need to pass the account ID as well. So let's say long account ID. We already have it here, and I'm just gonna paste it. So that is my account ID, and this is also the request type. Let's go to the terminal and here say replace equals to 4. And let's go to the database. Here it is number 3. We copied it from place building. Let's fix that as well. So in the place building, we're gonna cast it to integer. It's gonna be terminal.request id.build, and let's just copy that. For our replace, it's just gonna be replace. And here get data async, we don't need the data of the player. We need to get the player buildings. Here in the sync, I think we did something like that. Yes, this is it, buildings. It's gonna get a list of buildings for that player. I'm just gonna paste it here. So that's gonna get all the buildings for this account ID, and one of those buildings should have this database ID. It is the building we want to move it. So I'm just gonna say data building equals to null, and here I'm gonna do a for loop for my buildings dot count. Of course, first I'm gonna check to see if my buildings is null or not. Then I'm gonna loop through all my buildings. Let me cut that. And this database ID should be of type long. Then we're gonna break from this for loop and we're gonna say building equals to buildings I. Here let's create an if statement. If our building is not equals to null, do something, otherwise do something else. So we need to do something similar. I'm just gonna cut that. If building is not equals to null, check to see if we can place it on that X and Y. I think it would have been better if we could have created a method out of this, because we are repeating ourselves, but it doesn't matter. Let's just go like this. I'm gonna say if can place building. Actually, we have an if statement for it here. Let's just cut that. And I'm gonna paste it here. We don't need a building ID, but we do need to save that to the database. So we return 1 as a successful operation, 2 as the position is taken, and we could also return 0. And we can say that is the indication of no building has been found. So let me just clear this extra stuff, and then finally we're gonna send this packet, and that should be it. Let me clear this extra space, and here in the replace building async, we're sending an account ID, and instead of this account ID we could just send the building ID. And we're gonna pass X and Y to save them. We're going to use the update function. We don't need to use the insert. Let me just clear that. And the return type, let's just set it as Boolean. And it's gonna return true. We don't need that ID. So we're gonna say update buildings. Set X equals to something and Y equals to something. Let me clear those, where ID equals to this 0, 1, 2, and here in the same order I'm gonna say X and Y, and of course building ID. So now let's go here and say bool result equals to await replace building async, and we're gonna pass database ID X and Y. We don't even need to create a variable. Let's just remove that. So in the terminal we're gonna create another element for our switch statement. When in the receive packet, I'm gonna say in the case of request ID dot replace break, just read along, which is going to be the database ID, and let's say packet dot read long, and we're gonna say database dot replace building. We're gonna pass the client ID, database ID, and of course we need an X and Y. Let me just take a copy from there, paste it here. So let's just rename it to replace X, replace Y. So the server side has been handled. Let's go to the client side. Here I'm gonna create a packet, and of course I need to add the namespace. So let's create a replace in the request IDs and the client as well. We're gonna pass the database ID, and we also need to pass the current X and current Y. So we're gonna say selected instance dot current X, and the same thing. Let me just copy paste it, instance Y, and at the end sender dot send TCP packet. We're gonna send it, and in the player let's receive that. I'm just gonna get a copy of my build. Here I'm gonna say replace response. In the case of 0, we're gonna say no building. 2 is place taken, and here we're gonna say replaced successfully, which I think it would be better to send the X and Y from the server as well. So let's go to the database, and here at the end we're just gonna say packet dot write X, and we're gonna do the same thing for Y. And let's go to the client. Here, when the replace is successful, I'm gonna create an integer called replace X equals to packet dot read integer, and the same thing for Y. And let me clear that, and let's also pass the database ID. So I'm gonna say packet.write database ID. I'm gonna send it from the server to the client. It's gonna be read long, and let's set the type to long as well. Then we're gonna loop through all the buildings. It's gonna be UI main dot instance dot grid dot buildings, and if we found the building, we're gonna break from the loop, and we need to check. Let me just copy this. We're gonna say if that building equals to building dot select instance, building dot select instance dot deselect. We're gonna deselect it, and here at the end I'm just gonna say building dot place on the grid, and this is going to be replace X and replace Y. So this deselect here could cause a chain reaction. To fix that, let's go to the building, and I'm just gonna copy everything in the deselect. Let's go back and paste it instead of this. We don't need all of these, so I only need this 2 line. Let me cut that and place it over here. So here let's say building dot selected instance equals to null. We're gonna set the camera controller is replacing building to false, and let me just remove that, and I'm gonna cut that, bring it out here. Let's just say UI main buildings I. We're gonna set the area to false, and that should take care of our deselect in the building. There's a problem here, I think. we are setting the selected instance to null here, but we are accessing some values from it. So let me just cut this line and paste it down here. We're gonna get the values first, then we're going to set it to null. Of course, this indicates that the building has been already deselected, so we don't need to check for the selected instance here. I'm just gonna remove this. And one more thing, we need to make sure here in our sync data, our buildings.database ID is going to get value. So we're gonna say b.database ID equals to player.buildings i.database ID. And now let's go and play the server, and let's start the client as well. And as you can see, we have two buildings. I'm gonna select this one, move it around. And now I'm gonna select this one, move it. So we got an error in our server. Let me close the server. Here in the buildings, I don't have an X and Y. I have a X position and Y position. So let's fix that. This is going to be X position. And this is going to be Y position. Let me play the server, and let's go to the client. Here is another problem. We're not setting the game object to false. We're gonna send the base area dot game object to false. And now while we are here, let's enable this base area while we start replacing. I think it's happening in the camera controller. Here in the move started, the second we set this replacing to true, we're gonna say building dot select instance. I'm gonna turn that to true. Now let's start the server, and after that the client. We have two buildings. I'm gonna select one of them, move it around. The second I click here, it gets replaced. Let's also replace this one. That's that. And let me close the game and play it one more time. You'll see that their place has been saved. And just like that, we created the ability to move the buildings around and replace them. So this is enough for this video. Feel free to ask me any questions, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.